Hi there. Today I'll be talking to you about the evolution of animal advocacy, alternative strategies to achieve animal welfare advances. Part of the purpose of my talk is that a lot of the subjects that get covered in the Animal Studies Summer Institute tend to be pretty heavy and frankly kind of depressing. And after dealing with a whole week of that, it can leave some of the participants feeling sort of down and weighted. So I'm going to give you a range of examples of some really positive progress that's happened with regards to animal advocacy and some ways that you might find a way to have your scholarship play a role in that down the road. So I will just jump right into it. It's really great that this is happening at the University of Illinois. I'm a fourth generation graduate of the University of Illinois. And in this photo here, you'll see two more of those generations. On the right is my great grandfather, George Norton, who attended here in 1910. I think he graduated in 1910. Next to him is my beloved grandma Mary, who passed away in 2012 at the age of 97. She studied home economics here in the late 30s. And next to her, the baby, is my great uncle Charlie Norton, who went on to get his PhD at Cornell and ran the animal science and dairy science departments at Kansas State University for several decades. But this is also what really got me into these issues. As a small child, we would spend time at the farm, holiday dinners, et cetera, and just being around the animals then and seeing the uniqueness and how they each had personalities and had a value that seemed to me more than just the weight of their flesh. The farm's been in my family for 183 years now, and I've been managing it since about 1999. It's also very fitting to be doing this work at Harvard Law School because what's now known as Harvard Square was the original capital of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. And in 1641, they adopted their first body of laws, they called the Body of Liberties, and it included this. Number 92 said, "No man shall exercise any tyranny or cruelty towards any brute creature, which are usually kept for man's use." So this is considered pretty much the first ever piece of anti-cruelty legislation in North America. Also, in 1850, one of our graduates, George Thorndike Angel, he's considered one of the modern pioneers of the modern animal protection movement. And he was a contemporary of Henry Bergh in New York. And similar to Bergh, he who founded the ASPCA, Angel founded the MSPCA, and its animal hospital still bears his name. There's a big memorial to him in downtown Boston. He also formed a group called the Bands of Mercy Network in 1882, modeled after a similar group in Britain. And in the early 1900s, they had 82,000 chapters of these humane education clubs. And in 1913, there was a large convention in Kansas City that drew over 25,000 students, all there to sort of celebrate humane education. So it's really fitting that we're doing this work here. So fast forward literally 175 years, and we were able to launch the animal policy program, animal law and policy program at Harvard Law School. And as you can see, our mission is committed to analyzing and improving the treatment of animals through the legal system. So there's four main prongs of implementing our mission. One is expanding educational opportunities for students or school. The second is increasing both the quantity and quality of academic research in the field. And third is providing hands-on training via our clinic, which has been in operation for 2 years now. And that's basically like a mini law firm within the law school that can go file its own lawsuits. And the last is just informing and educating broader communities about these issues, having Harvard University as a platform for that. So jumping right into today's talk, imagine that we were in person. Hard to do, I know, but someday we will be back. And imagine that Masumi distributed a survey to everybody of what they would like for their class snack. And that went on to the dining services at the university, and turned out 94% of us wanted apples for the class snack. Sounds great. Surprised we ended up getting some creepy oranges instead of the apples that we'd requested. But imagine it's not just preferences, like you prefer to have an apple over an orange. Imagine that it's an actual resonates with one's core values. So say that most of the participants did not want to eat animal products. And so we put forth this request to have other offerings to us for the meals. And then surprise again, and said we get some 10-story death burger. So to make things worse, imagine that we later found out that the person who at the dining services who wasn't giving us what we directly requested was actually hired by us specifically to carry out our wishes. And then what if we found out that the reason they weren't carrying out those wishes is because that person was being paid by the creepy orange and big burger industries to push those products on us instead of giving us what we actually wanted? I mean, in most businesses and even academic settings, that person would be fired, right? Well, welcome to the legislative process. That's essentially what happens in Washington and a lot of the state legislatures, where you have special interests that are working very hard to sort of subvert the will of the public and present what the folks who are making the donations want. There's the age-old adage of one should not see how laws or sausages are made, and I completely disagree. I think one should really deeply and clearly see both how laws and sausages are made, because then one might take an interest in both of those and make personal decisions based on what they see. So back to that public opinion, ASPCA did a study in 2016 that found that 94% of Americans polled agreed that animals raised for food on farms deserve to be free from abuse and cruelty. Pretty clear, right? Woohoo, great news. We have 94% unanimity among voters. You think that would be great for farmed animals from a legislative perspective. However, there is a huge disconnect in public values. And the reality is that most animals raised for food or fiber in the United States have absolutely zero legal protections for almost their entire lives. Essentially, the only time they're protected is when the truck that they're on to be slaughtered pulls into the lane, the line going into the slaughter plant. That's when the federal protections start. And in the majority of states, farmed animals are expressly exempted from state anti-cruelty statutes as well. So they're not getting protected at the federal level and not protected at the state level. And again, up until that truck pulls into the line of the slaughterhouse, under federal law, most producers can do whatever they want to those animals with absolutely no legal recourse. In addition to not having anything proactively happening, animal advocates further have to spend time and resources playing defense to oppose negative legislation, such as Ag-Gag bills, or what are called right to harm, right to farm, right to harm bills, that would shield such cruelty from view or give producers carte blanche to do whatever they want. However, there has been legislative progress on a lot of other animal issues. My former organization, the Animal Legal Defense Fund, they do an annual ranking of states based on the strength of their animal protection laws. And I'm very proud to say that here in our home state of Illinois, we've been #1 basically since the inception of the ranking system. And a lot of that is due to one individual named Leedy Van Cavage. She now is the senior legislative director for our legislative attorney for the Best Friends Animal Society. And she lives close to Springfield. And she basically tries things. She's like, well, heck, I'll just try it here first. And she single-handedly has drafted and passed over 24 pieces of humane legislation. So when someone's out there asking like, oh, I'm just one person, what can I possibly do? The answer is quite a bit. So you'll see as some examples of progress that's been made. Back in 1985, you see only a handful of states treated dogfighting, cockfighting, and cruelty as a felony. Now, fast forward by 2015, every single one of the 50 states treated animal cruelty as a felony, and the vast majority of them had felony fighting laws as well. Another example is keeping dangerous wild animals as pets. Back in 2003, you see, about half the states did so. Again, by 2015, there's only 4 states that no longer there's only 4 states left that have no restriction on the ownership of dangerous wild animals. Pretty impressive. And you'll see here, this is probably hard for you to see on the screen, but this graph shows it's called tracking the pace of social change, and just shows you how you really do see these tipping points. So on all these issues from interracial marriage to women's suffrage, same-sex marriage, recreational marijuana, you'll see them grow a little bit. And then once one state does it, boom, a lot of them will all do it at once. So that you really do see these legislatures, there is a real herd mentality that happens with state legislatures. And so a lot of times you just need to get that ball rolling in the first place. However, as I hinted at before, there are very severe limits to the legislative process. Even in some of the most progressive states, it remains exceedingly difficult to pass legislation that affects industries that profit from the existing status quo of being able to exploit animals. Courts tend to give legislatures and agencies a very wide berth of discretion, making it even harder to challenge existing laws and regulations. Two classic examples are hunting and agriculture. There's only 6% of Americans that even engage in hunting. More Americans go bird watching than go hunting, yet hunters seem to have an absolute stranglehold on state legislatures. I don't know if legislators view them as sort of some sort of rural voter archetype that they don't want to cross, but even here, a progressive state like Illinois that has fantastic animal protection laws, within recent years, the state legislature decided to allow bobcat hunting for the first time in 40 years, even though in Illinois, I think it's only like 3% of folks that hunt. And in Massachusetts, again, extremely progressive state, very strong on animal protection laws. For 8 years straight, the Massachusetts legislature, their ag committee killed a bill to ban extreme forms of farmed animal confinement, despite polls showing that it had 80% support. Just could not even get it to a vote because it kept getting shut down in the ag committee. Then we have Kentucky. Just to give you an example of absolutely how crazy the legislative process can get. 5 days before the end of the 2015 session, Kentucky's Ag Committee tacked an Ag-Gag provision onto a bill that would have banned gas chamber euthanasia. I mean, nothing to do with this, but they're like, okay, we'll let you have your little shelter euthanasia bill, but we're going to tack on Ag-Gag. Then in the same session, the Ag Committee amended an anti-dogfighting bill to add an anti-abortion provision to that. Not sure how that meets the germane test, but there you go. So Representative Joni, a really great animal advocate, Representative Joni Jenkins, then had to throw it in reverse and spend a bunch of resources trying to kill both of her own bills. Huge resource drain. And then lastly, that same year, the Ag Committee took another bill that was simply to provide animals with adequate shelter. So as basic as it gets with animal protection is food, water, shelter, vet care. Those are like the four most basic requirements for caring for animals. Kentucky's still stuck at water. They've got food and water, had not yet added shelter. So this was just simply adding shelter to basic requirements to care for animals. And the Ag Committee again said, okay, we'll let you have your little shelter bill, but then they attached a rider that would have required Kentucky residents to buy Obamacare coverage for their pets. Again, this just shows how crazy it can get. So people ask like, okay, well, what are we even doing here? Is it even worth trying to pass a bill these days? And you see I'm just a bill. How's the bill become a law? Some things it doesn't. But I disagree. I say, yes, we have a lot more tools than the traditional legislative process. And I'm going to walk through a bunch of those for you today. Strategy number one, mobilize and be more effective than your legislative foes. We have a lot more at our disposal these days, and I'll show you how to do that. Strategy two, using the language and tactics of those in power. Strategy three, aiming small to win big, using non-traditional venues as levers. Strategy four, letting the public decide via direct democracy. Strategy number five, exposing animal abuse and holding bad actors accountable. Strategy six, charting corporate pressure points for consumer sentiment. And lastly, strategy seven, creating alternative products to compete in the marketplace. So first one, being more vocal than one's opponents. This day and age, we have endless options to inform and engage the American public, then channel that sentiment into positive political outcomes. And we do this through action alerts, Twitter, Facebook, online videos. There's no shortage of ways to get your message out there and to get it in front of people. Classic example is the 2015 anti-livestock bill in Arizona. So in 2014, we'd killed this bill, but it was resurrected in 2015, and it would have essentially like completely removed livestock from the anti-cruelty statutes, done all these horrible things, including Ag-Gag provision at first. Just terrible anti-livestock bill. So again, we were able to kind of get it stalled out in committee. But then Arizona has this, what's called the striker, we call like zombie bills, that allows someone to take a legislator to take a bill that's already made it through committee and then completely gut it and cut and paste an entirely other bill into there. And so that happened to us because you call them zombie bills because you think it's dead, rises back from the dead and comes back to haunt you. And so that happened with this, and this provision got cut and pasted into another bill. Next thing we know, it's on the governor's desk. So Governor Ducey then had 5 days to decide whether to sign or veto this law. So we had a really fantastic coalition of a bunch of different, both national and local animal advocacy organizations. And we launched this all-out campaign to try and urge Governor Ducey to veto the bill. My organization, ALDF, was a bit smaller than some of the other larger ones. And most legislators only want to hear from constituents. So I was trying to kill a bill in Louisiana, in New Orleans, in Louisiana once, and the sponsor got up and to the podium was like, "Looks like I lost 3 votes in New Zealand today." So they really don't care much to hearing from people who don't have the ability to vote for them. However, states do really care a lot about tourism and tourism dollars. So what we did at ALDF, we decided to target the state tourism board, and we did the same thing later in North Carolina. So that way we can reach out, instead of just the smaller number of supporters we have in Arizona, we could reach out nationwide to all of our supporters and then have them contact the state tourism board saying, if you allow this to happen, we're never going to come and spend another dollar in your state. Extremely successful, the kind of way to sort of punch above your weight. And so we had great polling on our side. That's pretty astounding. Across the board, 87% of Arizona voters agreed with that. They said the abuse of farm animals should be punished as strongly as abuse of other animals. And again, 85% of Republicans felt that way. 88% of Democrats. Across gender, it's pretty astounding to have numbers that strong and consistent. And so we channeled that sentiment into action. So the bill went to Ducey's desk, I think, on a Thursday, and by Monday, his office received 19,248 messages asking him to veto the bill. How many think he got asking him to sign it? 3. So, when you're an elected official, 19,248 to 3 is pretty simple math. And so we succeeded. So here is Governor Ducey's statement where he says, "Today I issue my first veto, House Bill 2150. And he goes on to say, and essentially what happened here is this was tacked on to another bill that would have, Katie Brophy McGee essentially had cut a deal with the cattlemen and was trying to do a companion animal bill, and at the expense of allowing them to tack on all these terrible things to farmed animals and to livestock. And so Ducey saw through that and said, while the supporters and sponsors of this bill are well-intentioned, when changing state laws related to the safety and well-being of animals, we must ensure that all animals are protected and mindful that increasing protections for one class of animals does not inadvertently undercut protections for another. Pretty astounding that you've got a Republican governor in a Republican state with a heavily Republican-dominated legislature vetoing a bill that's pushed by one of the biggest industries in his state. But why did he do so? Because we had the people power. When you've got 87% of your voters wanting to do something, again, that's pretty simple math. And people always talk about money in politics, but money in politics is only helpful to the point that it helps win or sway votes. And you see here, Karl Rove, who was known as Bush's brain, he had these super PACs, and they spent in 2012, they spent $140 million. And of that, only 1% supported candidates that ultimately won their elections. So, consider a colossal failure. So the second strategy is using the language of those in power. So there's a fantastic group called White Coat Waste Project, and they were founded by a former Republican political strategist. And when he was younger, after high school, he had worked in a research lab and was just horrified by what he saw there. And he said, someday I'm going to get to a position, his name is Ante Bellotti, someday I'm going to get a position where I can do something about that. So then, and he had, as a Republican strategist, he had a bunch of great relationships, a really fat Rolodex, and he knows what motivates the Republican legislatures. And so when in 2016, when Republicans gained pretty much total control of the federal government, you take lemons, make lemonade. He saw that as his opening to really try and do something about this. So the strategy is focus on wasteful government spending. So find the waste, expose the waste, defund the waste. And as Washington Post put it, a White Coat Waste Project is not a traditional animal advocacy organization, but one focused on what it says is government waste on testing, the kind of issue that could appeal to both fiscals, conservatives, and animal rights activists. So one way they go about winning that political support is focusing on cats and dogs who have sort of equal affinity across the spectrum. There's an old adage that, fascists love their dogs just as much as hippies. Exposing government complicity in harming those animals, and the fact that taxpayer dollars are causing animal death. It's very hard for someone on either side of the political spectrum to oppose those. And so they're a small organization. I think at the time they had 4 members, four staffers. And they said to take on the VA, Departments of Veterans Affairs. It's the second largest federal government agency in the federal government. And it's like, okay, we're a 4-person organization. Let's go toe to toe with them. And so they exposed how the VA had been using tax dollars to do all these horrible things, including like giving heart attacks to dogs, drilling into beagle skulls, severing their spinal cords, and conducting maximum pain experiments on dogs without relieving that pain. So again, hard to oppose any of that. And yeah, they succeeded. They made the VA cry uncle. And as Representative Dave Bratt, who is himself a veteran, said, these dog testing experiments at the VA are consuming limited taxpayer dollars, medical staff time, and office space that could be better utilized to deliver health care for veterans. The VA's first priority should be caring for our veterans, not harming man's best friend. Pretty great to have that kind of support in Congress. So next target, like, okay, let's go after the USDA. There was this cat cannibalism study where hundreds of dogs the USDA would send people over and they would purchase dogs at live animal markets, at dog slaughter markets in China and Vietnam. And in Brazil, they went to a lot of animal shelters in Brazil and bought a bunch of dogs under different pretenses, and then would kill all these animals and ship their body parts back to the US to be fed to cats in a toxoplasmosis study. So again, White Coat decides to target them, and boom, in just 2 weeks, again, the way that they punch above their weight is they are really good at getting legislators on their side, and they're fantastic at media access. So exposing these things in the media, they have a huge amount of contacts. And so within just 2 weeks of the first article about that USDA kitten cannibalism study, USDA caves and decides to end this. Millions of dollars have been spent on this, and it had been going on for something like 31 years. And it 2 weeks ends like that. And again, USDA has an annual budget of $141 billion. And here you've got this 4-person organization going toe to toe with them and making them cry uncle. So not being content to go after 2 of the largest federal agencies, they had to go after the EPA, and they started this whole EPA sucks campaign that was going after these terrible experiments where you see this little rabbit there that's forced to inhale diesel fumes. So not only did they get the EPA to stop that, they got the EPA to agree to end all animal testing by 2035. They're the first federal agency to make that move. It's absolutely historic. Not only did they say, okay, we're going to end all animal testing in the agency by 2035, Administrator Wheeler went on to allocate $4.25 million to help developing alternatives to animal methods in animal testing. Again, one of the largest amounts of federal money that's ever been given to an animal protection issue. I think probably some of the wild horse issues has received more, but you'd be hard pressed to find another amount of money the federal government's given towards animal protection. So, and again, Andy Bellotti, this is something that was made possible by all of his connections in the Republican Party. And one should not make any sort of assumptions about how people from any end of the political spectrum feel about animal protection issues. So HSUS, Humane Society of the United States, they do an annual Humane Voter Scorecard that ranks members of Congress based on how their animal protection voting records. So guess who was the #1 most humane voter for year after year after year after year? This guy, Rick Santorum. And he really did apply a lot of his verbiage about sort of the sanctity of sanctity of life and sort of all God's creatures. He really walked the walk on that and extended that to non-human animals. And one of my colleagues, who is the senior vice president for government affairs at the ASPCA and was formerly at HSUS for about 16 years, Nancy Perry, she said that some of the most deeply substantive conversations she's ever had with any legislator were with Rick Santorum. So it wasn't just they happened to be voting that way. He really was bought in. So the third strategy is aiming small to win big. So, with traditional legislative avenues blocked by business interests, there's a lot of smaller venues that can provide effective vehicles for leveraging broader change. So I've omitted one. I'm going to down to one case study here, and that's banning bullhooks. So what's called open contact is being around an elephant without any sort of barrier. It's only possible through the use of bull hooks or other painful weapons that can control those animals because they weigh several tons and can crush human beings like a grape should they decide to. These bull hooks here are the device that's typically used to control, and all these red spots you see are the most sensitive pressure points at which to apply those weapons. And so here you see a bull hook in use to train a baby elephant, and you can see the sharp point there is just dug into that poor baby's back. This was taken at a Ringling training facility, appeared in the Washington Post, with the quote that all Ringling Brothers elephants outwardly wear the scars and the physical emotional suffering they endure. Sorry, 1 second here. So first up, we thought, okay, well, let's try and do something. Let's try and work on the West Coast. So if we can make it as onerous, we hope to be this like death of 1,000 paper cuts, where if we can make it kind of onerous to bring elephants to the West Coast, like pick off a couple cities, they just won't bother. They just won't bother bringing them out west because you have to travel quite a great distance to get to the West Coast. So first off, okay, LA, we'll go to Los Angeles City Council. And in 2014, in a unanimous vote, they banned the use of bullhooks and other weapons on elephants. Pretty fantastic. So working our way up the coast, we went to Oakland. And again, later that year, Oakland decides to ban bullhooks about 6 months later. And the circus is no longer going to be able to visit there. And you see the mayor-elect saying, this is the right thing to do. It's just that simple. And another council member said, I don't need to have an elephant stand on one leg to see how cute he looks. I don't learn about elephants at the circus while I'm sitting there entertained. That's a show. And Mayor Jean Quan very presciently said, I'm convinced we're going to move to a time when there won't be any elephants in circuses. This was 2014. So boom, here we are just 6 months later. Ringling announces it's going to retire its elephants from the circus. Astounding. There are animal advocates I knew who didn't think they would ever see this in their lifetime. And here we thought it'd be a death of 1,000 paper cuts. It took two city council votes. And here the statement by Ken Feld, the head of the parent company of Ringling, said the biggest issue is there's been a lot of legislation in different cities and different municipalities regulating the use and treatment of animals, leading to frequent litigation. So here he's actually admitting that the reason that there's stopping bringing elephants is because of these two little city council votes. Pretty astounding. So we just hope they would, we're already in talks with Portland and Seattle, kind of working our way up the coast. And again, 2 paper cuts is all it took, but it didn't stop there. Here we are, 2 years later, after 146 years, Ringling Brothers just ceases to exist. So just 3 years after the LA City Council first voted to ban bullhooks, Ringling Brothers Circus just no longer even exists. And again, they just said, they saw a dramatic drop in sales. And so again, this is just absolutely astounding that as a result of essentially 2 city council votes, Ringling Brothers, after 146 years, just goes out of business. And again, dominoes kept falling. Now California the entire state has voted to ban bullhooks because even though Ringling's gone out of business, they're not the only circus that exists. So this will keep other circuses from bringing elephants into California. And other cities like New York has voted to ban the use of all wild animals in circus performances. So again, really astounding how much progress was able to be made. So there's another great example of orcas and how literally applying for a building permit with the California Coastal Commission, which I guarantee you 99% of Americans have never even heard of before, end up leading to banning all further captive breeding or importation of orcas by SeaWorld. Again, essentially what was a building permit. So the fourth strategy here is engaging in direct democracy. So in 24 states, one can bypass the captured interests of politicians and agencies and take issues directly to the people via a public ballot initiative process. So between the 20 years, between 1990 and 2010, there were 44 animal protection ballot measure campaigns. And of those, 30 were successful, a 69% success rate, pretty great. So the way that advocates, a lot of those early ones have been related to wildlife and hunting issues. But in 2002, some advocates decided to focus on farmed animal protection. And so in Florida, they proposed Amendment 10, which would have banned keeping pregnant pigs in gestation crates. Again, not that many pigs in Florida, but it's seen as a very politically important state. So this had a lot of impact. So it passed. 55% of Florida voters, agreed that they agreed to ban gestation crates. So they said, okay, regrouped, looked at how how that went, and said, okay, well, let's try Arizona. Again, this time they not only banned gestation crates, but they decided to add veal tethering as well. Now, again, not a lot, a pig walking down the street would probably, cook on the hoof just in Arizona. It's so hot. But yet again, 62% of voters supported this measure. So, and in fact, after this passed, so now it looks like a trend, right? You've got two really populous states. And in fact, after this came out, the head of the U.S. Veal Association came out and said, "Oh my God, this is happening all over. We need to do something about this, and we're gonna work to end veal tethering." So those both were sort of trial runs to set up the big one, which was California's Proposition 2. That only banned gestation crates and veal crates, but also battery cages for egg-laying hens, hugely important, affecting millions of animals. That passed with 63% support, the largest margin ever for a ballot initiative in California history. So a few years later, in 2016, Massachusetts decides to try and up the ante. So they do their own ballot initiative that has all of California's great prohibitions, but also importantly, it bans the sale of products from other states if those animals are raised in extreme confinement. So what this means, it gives us sort of an extraterritorial reach in that if you're an egg producer in Iowa and you want to sell your eggs into Massachusetts, they have to be cage free. Again, another great way of taking sort of a smaller state, but allowing it to punch above its weight and have a much broader impact across the country. So the coalition was called Citizens for Farm Animal Protection, and they had all these volunteers flock to the state in the fall of 2015 to gather signatures, because you need to gather a certain number of signatures to even get on the ballot, and that's usually a function of it's usually a percentage of the voter turnout in a previous election, and turnout was so abysmal in the 2014 midterms that the bar was pretty low for 2016, the 2016 election. So anyway, we gathered double the number of signatures needed to get the measure on the ballot, and then boom, it passes. And November 8th, so 77.7% of, and it's interesting, I mentioned before, all the polls were showing about 80% support by voters, but even so, for 8 years straight, the Ag Committee and the Massachusetts legislature kept stalling, legislatures kept killing this very bill, and here it passes with just about 80% of the vote. And again, this also tied the record for the highest margin of victory for any ballot initiative in Massachusetts history. Was one of the very few bright spots of the 2016 election, I will say. And we were all like, it's a big, at the MSPCA, we're at this big, these results came in pretty early. So we're having a big victory party, and all these people are speaking about how great this is for the animals. And then bit by bit, the other results start coming in from the presidential election. And the mood turned a little bit, I'll just say. So anyway, California, not to be outdone, decides to answer back. And it's like, okay, well, if Massachusetts can do that, we can do it. And we're a much bigger state that has a lot more consumers. So we will be able to have an even broader impact on other states producing farmed animals. So they have this very large coalition of all these different fantastic organizations. And again, polling was showing that about 72% of California residents supported increasing the protections of Prop 2. So, and again, they were correct. So passed with 63% voter support, upheld by the court. So this does all the same thing that the Massachusetts bill, added a sale ban and increased the size for some of the cage requirements, et cetera. But not only did it pass, but it was upheld by the courts. So now all the producers all over the country were like, oh my God, we can't have this happen. California is such a huge market, so it's going to really force all these producers in other states like Iowa and others, Missouri, to go cage free because they want access to the California market. So literally just a week and a half ago, on June 28th, the Supreme Court rejected a meat industry's lawsuit trying to challenge Prop 12. And that let stand a lower court, Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruling rejecting a challenge to Prop 12 in 2020. And again, the first ruling on this was the year before, in November 2019, where again, every other court has heard this, has just said that these challenges do not hold water. And here's a quote: Ninth Circuit 3-judge panel ruled today in favor of upholding this historic initiative that bans the heinous confinement of hens, mother pigs, and baby veal cows. So this sets a great precedent. So the Supreme Court said, now we're not going to touch this. So that, again, opens the path for a lot of other states to follow in their footsteps. The fifth strategy is exposing animal cruelty and abusers and holding them accountable. So a lot of you might have heard of undercover investigations. They're one of the most effective tools for informing the public as to what's going on behind closed doors when it comes to raising farm animals for food. And an interesting study found that 46% of those who switched to a vegetarian or vegan diet said that online videos played a role in their decision. Now, we don't know if that's just instructional videos or cooking videos or cruelty videos, but that's a pretty substantial fact or statistic. So, and here, more formally, Kansas State University, where my great uncle Charlie used to run the animal science department, their Department of Ag Economics put out this report in 2010 entitled U.S. Meat Demand, the Influence of Animal Welfare Media Coverage. And a breakout quote here says, as a whole, media attention to animal welfare has significant negative effects on U.S. meat demand. And here's another quote from this. It's increasing media attention to animal welfare issues triggers consumers to purchase less meat rather than reallocating expenses across competing meats. So rather than just like, oh, chicken's bad, I'll just buy more beef. What they're finding is when you hear that certain type of meat is bad, you just buy less meat. And so not even needing to go to conjecture from what might be going through the minds of the meat producers, you get it straight from the horse's mouth in this textbook called Contemporary Issues in Animal Agriculture. It says, quote, one of the best things modern animal agriculture has going for it is that most people haven't a clue how animals are raised and processed. For modern animal agriculture, the less the consumer knows about what's happening before the meat hits the plate, the better. Look, this is a textbook by Peter, I would say cheeky, professor of animal ag at Oregon State University. Pretty astounding that they're that transparent about how they really feel about this. Again, because they know that if people knew what was going on, they wouldn't want to participate in it. So, the threat of undercover investigations is very real. As Will Potter, journalist, put it in his book, Green is the New Red, he said, the biggest threat facing, again, one of the big issues in the past was for animal research, animal testing, what's called, there was a few folks who would go in and destroy animal research labs. And so this whole lab trashing thing became this really, really big, a really big issue that kind of got blown, I think, a little out of proportion, but it was used to really have some draconian checks on the civil liberties of both environmental activists and animal rights activists. But as Will Potter says, the biggest threat facing big ag isn't activists are breaking windows, it's that they're creating them. They're opening these windows and for people to see what's actually going on producing the meat that these folks are eating. So I will spare you the video here, but here's a still from one undercover investigation by a group called Mercy for Animals up in Wisconsin. And you see this cow, too sick to walk on its own, is being lifted up by this end loader. It looks like something out of an alien abduction video or something. And so just one investigation in Wisconsin at just one dairy producer found that 4 Wees Brothers employees were convicted of multiple counts of animal cruelty. DiGiorno Pizza, who sourced dairy from that farm, said that they would not accept any more cheese made with milk from the Wees Brothers dairy, 4,500 cows. So that's their biggest customer going away. Nestle was the parent company that owned DiGiorno Pizza. They then announced, again, Nestle, people think chocolate milk. Nestle is the world's largest food company with over $100 billion worth of annual revenues. So as a result of the embarrassment from this undercover investigation, because, right next to everywhere that video was shown were all these logos of DiGiorno Pizza and Nestle. So Nestle announced that we require all of its 7,300 suppliers worldwide to eliminate tail docking, dehorning, gestation crates, and battery cages at hundreds of thousands of farms worldwide that supplied products for their to their company. I mean, this is again just one little undercover investigation. One investigator at one dairy operation in Wisconsin led to pretty much worldwide impact. But it's not just a matter of animal welfare; it's a matter of public health as well. a 2008 undercover investigation at the Hallmark Westland Meatpacking Company. Investigation by HSUS showed workers dragging and using forklifts on downed cows that, again, were too weak or sick to walk to slaughter, and do absolutely horrific things to them, stabbing them in the eye. The outcry led to the largest food recall in U.S. history. And again, the undercover investigator kept going back to the USDA saying, look at all this footage I'm having. They're obviously breaking the law. This is absolute law breaking. And USDA is like, we don't really see it. Investigator goes back for a couple of weeks, gets all this more horrific footage, goes back to the USDA saying, look at all this terrible stuff that's going on. This is a blatant violation of the animal welfare laws. Like, we don't really see it. So finally, they just went public and had this massive public outcry. And again, that led to the largest food recall in U.S. history. 143 million pounds of beef, 37 million of which was slated for the school lunch program. And unfortunately, most of that recalled beef had already been consumed. So, you hear a lot of things like when there's a bad undercover investigation at a producer, the producer will come out and it's like, oh, that's just these low-level workers, a couple bad apples. That's really not policy. But I'm sorry, when you've got 143 million pounds of beef being recalled, that's not a couple isolated incidents or a couple bad apples. That's policy. And so as a result of this, a year later, the Obama administration permanently banned all downer cows from entering the food supply. And there was nearly a $500 million judgment entered against the company. And they obviously effectively went out of business. So, because there's a lawsuit over, there's basically called the False Claims Act, where if you're providing a service to the federal government and you make a misrepresentation, you can be sued for making misrepresentation. And so the representation here was that they were following the law and producing the food properly. So yeah, $500 million judgment. So how does the industry respond to all this terrible law breaking by some of the producers? Like, you think they'd want to clean up their act? Like, we really need to stop these people from going out and breaking the law like this and making us look bad, right? Wrong. They decided to pass Ag-Gag. They decided oh no, what we really need to do is make it illegal for anyone to report on us breaking the law. That's the way we're going to solve this. So that's what's called Ag-Gag legislation. So these are bills that would prohibit the filming of what's going on at agricultural facilities, or some of them prohibit like lying on a job application to get hired at one of these places. So far, there's a resurgence. There were 3 that were passed in the early 90s, but there was a big resurgence in 2010. And so far, 47 of these Ag-Gag bills have been introduced across 27 states. All of them but 8, due to amazing coalition work by a bunch of animal protection organizations and advocates. Every single one of those but 8 were defeated. 3 in Iowa and a few other states. So right now, the tally is that 5 states still have Ag-Gag laws in the books. So, public opinion is really strong in this. Again, here you have 64% of Americans oppose the criminalization of undercover investigations at ag facilities. That's pretty astounding. And again, when you look at the consistency, consistent across age, consistent across gender, consistent across region, and even political affiliation. I mean, I defy you to find another social issue that has this sort of consistency across all these various demographics. So once these laws are passed, we said, okay, well, let's go after them. And so led by the Animal Legal Defense Fund, my former organization, and a really amazing attorney named Justin Marceau, who's a professor at the University of Denver, and Matthew Lieben, and another great attorney at PETA named Matt Strugar, they filed suit and said, basically, it's unconstitutional. You're restricting speech, and that recording is itself a form of speech. Because you're using that to inform the broader public about these issues. So in August 2015, a federal judge struck down the Ag-Gag law, ended up being a very momentous day, both for me and for animal protection generally. I'll get to that in a little bit. So the issue was, the ruling was issued on that day, and again said making it illegal to secretly film animal abuse at ag facilities is unconstitutional. So the written opinion, I was at the oral arguments, and you could see the judge at the time was taking this pretty seriously, and his opinion came out. And then, again, this is in Boise, Idaho, not exactly Berkeley, California. The judge said, food protection is not a private matter. These activists' undercover methods, quote, actually advance core First Amendment values by exposing misconduct to the public eye and facilitating dialogue on issues of considerable public interest. Under Ohio's law, Upton Sinclair's conduct would expose him to criminal prosecution, the judge said. Pretty amazing language. So then, of course, the industry pushed to appeal that, and they actually had to, the government had to dig up all this other money to fund this appeal. And the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, again, agreed and struck down the vast majority of the Ag-Gag law. And that was in January 2018. So adding expense to embarrassment, if you win a suit against under one of these constitutional challenges, if you win, you can get attorney's fees. So Idaho was then ordered to pay $250 million to PETA, ALDF, and other nonprofits in attorney's fees in an Ag-Gag case. Pretty astounding. So again, they then use this to go on and now with this really great, strong federal court ruling and now appellate court ruling, went on to just challenge Ag-Gag in a lot of other states. So Utah's was struck down. Then they said, okay, well, let's go towards one of the strongest states, Iowa, one of the biggest ag producers in the country. That law gets struck down in 2019. They then passed another one. That one got struck down. So it's been just a really fantastic. Now North Carolina's law has been struck down. So they're just kind of picking off all these states. So that's why there's only 5 of them left, and those hopefully those days are their number days are limited as well. So strategy number 6, targeting corporate pressure points. So consumer sentiment is probably the most powerful alternative advocacy tool. Money really does talk, and corporations react really quickly to threats to their income streams. For many years, farm animal advocates, they would spend their time battling with producers, like going with egg producers or pork producers. But and it was one of the most depressing parts of any animal law conference because there was just no incentive, and just the numbers are just so staggering. Just billions and billions and billions of animals killed every year for food. Again, the advocacy groups then decided to amend their tactics, and so it's frustrating to go after producers because they had no direct nexus with consumers. Their only relevant margin factor is profit margin. So even if it costs 1/10 of a penny per egg, when you're talking about billions of eggs, that adds up to real dollars. And again, some egg producer that no one's ever heard of has absolutely zero incentive to change. And occasionally you could go get an undercover investigation and expose one of them, embarrass them, but it was too ad hoc. So in the mid 2000s, animal advocates started targeting retailers, restaurant franchises, grocery store chains, and food service providers. So what was great about this is that they do have a very strong consumer nexus. And again, you do one of these undercover investigations and you have all these corporate logos right next to it. They really freak out. And as you saw with Nestle, will take pretty drastic. And so again, these retailers, that they've got no skin in the game. Like your restaurant, they don't care where their meat comes from, really. So if all of a sudden they're going to get a big black eye if the meat comes from a place that's not treating their animals well, they want that fixed. So the first big victory was McDonald's in 2015. They decided they announced they're going to go cage-free by 2020. That's 2 billion eggs sold per year just in the US and Canada. It would directly improve the lives of 8 million hens. Pretty astounding. The very next day, what do you know? Hickman Eggs, one of these egg producers, said there's no possible way we can go cage-free. It's economically, and there's no absolute way we can do that and stay in business. The very next day after McDonald's announces it goes cage-free, Hickman Eggs like, oh, we're going to go cage-free because they want the McDonald's contract. Suddenly, wow, what do you know? They can find a way to make it economically viable. They had 2 million hens. Rembrandt Foods, the 3rd largest producer in the country with 15 million hens, they said they're going to go cage-free as well. The number 2 producer had already announced even before McDonald's. So it just shows you the leverage that these national brands have. And again, here's a graphic that just shows just a sliver of the major U.S. brands that have decided that made cage-free commitments. So according to Fox Business, 2015 was known as the year of the cage-free hen, just due to the amazing success of this campaign. Then the very next year in April, Walmart, the biggest brand, the largest retailer in the world, annually sells nearly 9 billion shell eggs. They make an announcement that they're going to switch to cage-free. And so you see here, the number of hens that are covered by these corporate cage-free pledges. And you see by 2017, we're already up to nearly 275 million hens that have been impacted by these pledges. And not staying in the United States, they make it a global campaign. And there's a group called the Open Wing Alliance that expanded these same tactics internationally. And so here you see a great organization called Animal Equality, having these billboards in Mexico. Here you have a group in Taiwan doing some demonstrations trying to get cage-free eggs in Taiwan. And here it just shows all the various countries that have moved along and made and have been touched by these cage-free pledges. So the next big frontier is broiler welfare. There's something known as the Better Chicken Commitment. 9 billion chickens alone are raised for meat in the U.S. I think it's like close to 64 billion worldwide. So all three major food service providers have made commitments already to improve welfare for chickens that include slower growing genetic strains and breeds, control atmosphere stunning rather than like shocking them or to stun them before they're killed, minimum space requirements and enrichment such as natural light, hay bales, etc. So the reason this is necessary is because broiler chickens are pretty much prisoners in their own bodies. These are the chickens that are raised for food, not to lay eggs. And so as you see here, sorry, I need to move this. You'll see here that these chickens, so in 1957, a chicken that weighed 34 grams when it was born, in 56 days, 2 months later, it weighed 900 grams. Now, that same chick that's born at 44 grams, by 2 months, it weighs 4,202 grams. So it's still the same age chicken. They've just genetically engineered them to grow so quickly. And so you've got these like Arnold Schwarzenegger type chickens that have these like still cheeping like a little baby chick. And just for perspective, so going from 44 grams to 4,200 in just 2 months, that's the equivalent of a 700 pound, that's equivalent of a 7-pound baby 2 months later weighing 700 pounds. I mean, it's astounding, and their bodies can't handle it. So their legs break and they develop all these problems and they have heart problems, et cetera. So, pardon me. This graph shows all the amazing progress that's been made on broiler welfare. Whole Foods was one of the very first brands to come out and adopt this. And now you see all these others on the side. And again, this is from 2017, it's increased substantially since then even. And again, now we're going after McDonald's to try and get them to do the same. They came out early on the cage-free, but they've been dragging their feet on the broiler welfare. So this is a photo from 250 people protesting the very visible McDonald's in Los Angeles in 2018. Very sad clown there. So the other way to affect companies directly is by putting direct public pressure on. So in 2015, South African Airways bans the transport of all hunting trophies on their carriers. Astounding. I'm over at the vegan restaurant, which you're not in Urbana, Illinois, called Dancing Dog, which you were not able to enjoy this summer. But I was sitting outside there and I read this on my phone. The language is just astounding, saying, the hunting of endangered species has become a major problem in Africa and elsewhere with the depletion to near extinction of wildlife, the once roaming prolific numbers, saying they're no longer support game hunters. The vast majority of tourists visit Africa, in particular, to witness the wonderful wildlife that remains. And it's our duty to ensure that this is preserved for future generations and deter activity that puts this wonderful resource in danger. I mean, this is astounding. It just came out of the blue. However, the very last line of this article said, Delta Airlines, the only US-based airline with direct flights to South Africa, did not immediately respond with a request for comment regarding the embargo. So turns out that I have to travel a bunch for my job. I think that year was the only one in the previous 10 that I'd flown fewer than 100,000 miles. That's because I ended up having heart surgery and I wasn't allowed to fly for 2 months and I still flew 89,000 miles. And I was a Delta customer. So I was like a charter member of their like diamond medallion status. And so I thought, wow, I'd be like the perfect person to reach out to Delta and say, hey, like, why aren't this other competitor of yours is doing something cool? Why don't you do something cool too? And so change.org, a close friend of mine was working there. And it's a great vehicle. You can see that at the bottom there's a little blurb about it. It allows, it's a really effective means to accomplish multiple goals. One, informing the populace about these social issues. 2, tabulating public sentiment about those issues. And then 3, targeting that sentiment towards the relevant decision makers. I've actually been on the receiving end of a change.org petition, and it is about as annoying as you can imagine. When I was at ALDF, the person out there thought we weren't they would rather see us prioritize differently. And every time it hit a milestone, I got an email in my inbox like, this many people think you suck today. So you also have the multiplier effect of social media. You can track shares and views. It's far more than just signatures as far as exposing these issues. So in May of 2015, I started this trophy petition. And again, like I said, I wasn't allowed to fly for 2 months. Once I got the green light, I flew 26,000 miles in 10 days. Needless to say, it wasn't that great for my health. I ended up getting pneumonia. So promising my family and work that I would not work for a little while. And the thing with change.org, they don't like to be organizations come from an individual. I'm like, well, this doesn't work. I'll just put this petition up. And so I decided to do so and pick that photo. And again, you really want to spend a super depressing day, try searching through photo sites like Flickr and whatever, trying to find the perfect trophy hunting photo. I mean, just one of the most depressing days I've ever spent. This was the runner-up, just appalling. So it was really fantastic publicity for the issue. In just 3 months, we garnered nearly 400,000 signatures. And again, like the notifications I was giving, every time we would hit any of these milestones, 5,000, 10,000, 25,000 emails would get sent out to all the Richard Anderson and all the top executives at Delta. And it was covered by a bunch of international news outlets and just got great social media traction. And it did have an effect. It spurred several other major air carriers. Just the fact that the petition was out there, a lot of other air carriers like, wow, this makes a lot of sense. And so they decided to do that. So British Airways, KLM, Singapore, Lufthansa, Emirates, all these, they decided to stop transporting hunting trophies just as a result of my petition. Even though they weren't even the target of it. However, Delta still remained a holdout and they would not budge on the issue. So 3 months later. So again, put this petition up in May. On my birthday, July 27th, the Cecil, the lion story breaks. And you hear the story of an American hunter who killed this beloved lion after it was lured out of a sanctuary. So, Walter Palmer pretty much became public enemy number one. Sort of mild-mannered dentist by day, wildlife slaughterer in his spare time. So, any of you remember where Walter Palmer happens to be from? Minneapolis, Minnesota. Why is that relevant? Just so happens to be Delta's third largest U.S. hub. So being a diamond medallion Delta customer, it didn't take me long to put that together. So I reached out to Delta and said, hey guys, guess what? I'd be willing to bet every penny I have, since you're the only U.S. airline that has direct service to South Africa, I would bet every dollar I have that Walter Palmer was actually a Delta customer. And so I go, luckily for them, Cecil's body was seized by the authorities back in Africa and not brought to the United States. But a lot of people don't realize the story broke in July 27th, but he was actually killed over July 4th weekend. So it's highly likely that had that not happened, that Delta would have transported Cecil Lion's body back to the United States. And can you imagine? I mean, my friend who runs the dodo said that, it was almost Cecil fatigue. There were so many stories about this that, it was just absolute overload. And can you imagine if the second line of every single one of those stories was like, and Delta Airlines, despite, flew Cecil's illegally butchered body back to the United States, despite being served with a petition with 400,000 signatures 3 months ago, asking them to stop that crap. So I think they realized they dodged a pretty big bullet there and they ended up doing the right thing. So on August 3rd, the same day that the Idaho Ag-Gag ruling came down, the very same day, Delta announces that it's banning the shipment of wildlife trophies as freight. We literally got a heads up, and I think it's one of the maybe only 2 fist pumps I've ever done in my life to get that message from them, giving us a heads up and allowing us to get an order for media and things like that. So doesn't stop there. Within 24 hours, all 3 major U.S. airlines followed suit. Delta, United, and American all banned the transport of hunting trophies. Pretty astounding. And again, that only led to further publicity of the issue. You got clowns like me getting to go on CNN International and talk about these issues. It's really, really fantastic publicity and has led to even further airlines to doing further. So Richard Branson in the news today for touching space. He recently called for an industry-wide ethical cargo policy that would have made embargoes like universal across hunting all carriers, including banning cargo items such as bluefin tuna and shark fins, primates in laboratory rats, hatching eggs, day-old chicks, and in cetacean products, all sorts of things. Pretty astounding. And Emirates started a whole wildlife initiative. You see this, people might not know of Emirates. They're the world's second largest cargo carrier, in between FedEx and UPS. And they adopted a bunch of these moves, innocuous moves. So again, running short on time here. The very last strategy is outcompeting in the marketplace. So, when given the option, many consumers will choose products that are healthier, more humane, and cause less damage to the environment. Just bullet for bull shows it. So for others, they'll buy any product as long as it tastes good, is affordable, and convenient. So you don't even need to reach people ethically if you just sort of build something better. So there's an organization called the Good Food Institute, run by a fantastic advocate named Bruce Friedrich, who had spent many years at PETA and then was at at Farm Sanctuary for many years, a really good friend and colleague. So he starts this organization in 2015, specifically to promote alternatives to animal food products and to channel investment into developing those products. So here's some clips from their website. Imagine a food system where not only they're most affordable and delicious, but they're also good for you as well. So they do this through providing strategic support to companies. That's Uma Valetti there, who founded Memphis Meats, which has recently changed their name. They were one of the first cultured meat companies to actually not using plant-based product, but actually growing real meat from cellular substrates, and also promoting plant-based products. So we've seen extreme success in the marketplace from some of these products, these meat alternatives. So KFC unveiled a vegan burger in the UK, and it sold out in less than 4 days, selling 500% more than their average launch. Burger King, they announced they would start selling the Impossible Whopper after doing a successful trial run in St. Louis. It becomes one of the most successful launches in Burger King history. Drives 5% of their US sales that quarter that it came out in 2019. They've got 7,300 locations across the United States that anyone can go get. And then now they even make a fully vegan version that they won't even cook on the same grill if you'd like. So investors are clamoring to be part of this because they see all this crazy success. So Beyond Meat did an IPO, is the most successful IPO since 2008 in nearly 2 decades. And even today, their stock is still trading at 600% above its 2019 IPO price. Astounding. So what is the answer in all of this? It's you all. You can do a lot. When you get legislative calls to action, respond. Calls really do matter. I've had legislators say that, if you get 5 phone calls on an issue, everyone's ears prick up. If you get 10 phone calls on an issue, it's a 5-alarm fire, because so few people do participate in the political process. So make calls, send emails to decision makers, and action alerts people are pretty sparing with the action alerts. Only sending when they really need you to make a call, and it only takes a few calls to make a really big impact. So get involved in direct campaigns is another great way to do this. Gather signatures, help with ballot initiatives, and also take the initiative to make your voice heard, and also vote with your dollars in consumer choices. And again, a lot of you who are studying and becoming scholars in some of these issues, I view you all as sort of creating the magic bullets, or the silver bullets that with your intellect and with your research and your scholarship, you're really providing a lot of the theoretical fundamental underpinning for a lot of this advocacy. So you all are sort of like creating these silver bullets that then advocates like myself and others can go out and implement and use. So, keep doing what you're doing. And it's great that you're participating in wonderful events like the Summer Institute here in the University of Illinois. So thank you. Here's my contact information. Please feel free to reach out if you have any questions, and we'll see you on Friday for a conversation about all of this. Great. Thank you so much.